Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ophthalmology Business Podcast. We help you develop your ideal practice with help of other doctors and experts. The topics we cover include marketing, management, leadership, recruitment, HR, mindsets, and more. I am Guido Paquette, one of the co-hosts of this podcast. Every listener of this podcast is welcome to join the Ophthalmology Business Academy at www.obacademy.org. The membership is on us, and it's our gift to you. Today, I'm excited to talk to Dr. Emilio Justo. Dr. Justo is a medical director at Arizona Eye Institute and Cosmetic Laser Center. What makes today's conversation even more special is that Dr. Justo is not just a respected medical professional, but also a TEDx speaker. Our topic today is a doctor's TEDx journey, how he chose delayed gratification as his topic. Let's jump in. Hello, Dr. Justo. How are you today?
Fantastic, Guido. Thank you for having me on. It's a sincere privilege and honor, and I look forward to chatting with you and your audience.
Likewise, I really look forward to having this conversation because I highly respect the TEDx platform. And so it's exciting to talk to someone who's actually had the opportunity to do that. So we hope that we can learn a lot from you today. And I know I personally hope to learn a lot from you as well, because that would be an amazing thing to do. And maybe some of those out there that can put a goal and we can do a TEDx talk one day. So maybe we can figure out how you got there. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. So can you begin just by giving the podcast audience just a little bit of introduction about your journey into ophthalmology, how you started and how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. First, let me just digress by giving a little bit of my background. So I'm actually a Cuban refugee, and I came to the United States at the age of 3 with my parents, not having anything. And so as you can imagine, when you come to a foreign country and you don't have any material wealth or resources, you learn to do what you have to do to succeed. I did the majority of my growing up actually in Northwest Indiana. So contrary to what you might be thinking that I grew up in Miami, no, I'm one of these Cubans that landed in Northwest Indiana via church organizations that helped Cuban refugees resettle into the United States. I did my undergraduate and medical school at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I was extremely fortunate to be accepted into their 6-year pre-medical medical program. It's an accelerated program, and at the time they were only accepting 10 applicants nationwide from out of state. So that really accelerated my journey because I actually finished high school at 17. I finished medical school at 23. And then I did my ophthalmology residency in Washington, D.C. and finished at 27. And then at that time, I decided to move to Arizona because I was just tired of the winters and the cold weather. And I wanted blue skies and palm trees and decided that Phoenix is the way to go. And here I've been all along. And I just started my 35th year in practice in the northwest suburbs of Phoenix, the Sun Cities. For those of you who know Phoenix, I'm in Sun City West with another office in Sun City. And that's my journey into medicine, and I've never looked back and enjoying every minute of it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Justo. That's a very impressive journey for someone to get through undergraduate and medical school so fast. I think it's a small world as well. As we were talking right before we got started, I'm the son of a Cuban immigrant, and I understand when you come from that situation, the mindset that you come with is that no one's going to ever take it away from you, and you're going to figure out how to get it done. And so I appreciate it, and I can see that you've been very successful and you had the right mindset to get there. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Appreciate the kind words.
So let's talk about your TEDx journey. I think that's the topic of our discussion today. So I understand you gave a TEDx talk. What prompted you to do that?
So it's kind of interesting. I've always admired, the TED Talks, the TEDx talks, and I always thought, oh, maybe one day I'll find the time and figure out how to do that. In addition, growing up, even from an early age, my triad to success, as I call it, is are three different topics. Number one, self-discipline, because I was always very disciplined. Number two, perseverance, because I kept going no matter what obstacles I faced. And then number three, delayed gratification, because clearly I had a lot of delayed gratification in my life being a Cuban refugee. Then just earlier this year, we're in 2023, I think end of March, I was on my bike, just listening to different podcasts and searching the internet, what have you. And all of a sudden, one of these infomercials comes up from this thought leader organization headed by Taylor Conroy. And basically, it's a group whose focus is to teach people and how to navigate the TEDx journey. Incredible organization. I mean, they are just so well organized and so methodical. And so they walked me as well as hundreds of others. I mean, they've had about 400 clients who have appeared on TEDx stages. And it's quite an exhaustive process, I must say. I mean, I've cherished every moment of it. But the process basically goes as such. You have all sorts of daily Zoom calls that you can join into. Now, of course, the difficulty for someone like me who works for a living 5 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day, I don't really have time to be on these live calls with a myriad of other clients. But they do record these. So I just started, working on them slowly, methodically on the weekends, doing kind of the homework that was assigned, preparing what they call application templates that have questions of frequently asked questions that applications require, because the way TEDx works is that there's about 1,500 TEDx organizations throughout the world, and they each have their own organizing committee. They each may focus on different topics at any given time, and they each have their own application. And I'm told that on average, it takes about 90 to 100 applications submitted to get an acceptance. So I started this journey and I worked on the weekends, and I started submitting applications probably late April, early May, little by little. I mean, it would take hours. I mean, it's so time intensive. And so by the end of June, I had submitted 87 applications. And then it was time for a break. My family and I went to Western Canada for a couple of weeks. And on July 5th, I'll remember it forever, we're in Banff in Alberta having lunch with our tour guide, and I get a phone call. And the phone call is inviting me to TEDx Cherry Creek HS, which is basically just outside Denver in Parker, Colorado. However, it was July 5th, and the event was going to be August 12th. And the way the process works is that you fill out the applications knowing kind of the skeleton of what your talk is going to be, but you don't actually, the way they teach you, you don't actually write the talk until afterwards. So I hadn't even begun writing the talk. So I had basically 5 weeks to write the talk, practice the talk, memorize the talk, and then deliver the talk. But we had a great TEDx organizing committee, and they provided what we call a speaker coach that would help on Zoom meetings on the weekends, fortunately, with the whole group of 12 speakers. And that would help me make edits and refine the talk, and it was extremely helpful. And then August 12th came, and I was in Denver and delivered the talk, and it was the most exhilarating experience. I mean, just phenomenal. So much so that I'm now an addict, and I'm in the process of hopefully writing 2 more talks, which I've just started, one on self-discipline and one on embracing failure. So my goal is in the next year to deliver another talk if I'm fortunate enough to be accepted.
I'm sure that was an amazing experience for you. How many people? So when you gave your TEDx talk, how large is the audience, more or less?
Yeah, so the audience is very tremendously, and as they preach to you, it's not really about the audience. Our TEDx talk was in a beautiful little theater, just a quaint little theater called the Old Schoolhouse.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know exactly how many were there. I'm estimating probably about 100 people. But as they preach, it's not really about the audience in the actual event. It's about the audience after the event once the video, because the TEDx speech is professionally videotaped, and then it goes through an editing process, and then the TED organization, the national or international organization, does their research, and they research the topic. They make sure that everything that's stated is factually correct, and any studies that are cited are factually correct. And then they release the video to the TED YouTube channel. And that's where you want your audience, is you really want your talk going live and hopefully going viral to some degree. I mean, obviously it's a challenge getting those millions of views like some people have, but that's what the goal is. It's not so much the live event.
And you mentioned that you weren't able to prepare the bones of the speech until later in the process and practice it and get ready for it. So what geared you towards the topic of delayed gratification?
Well, a couple things. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, that it truly, my whole life, as I look back throughout my life, it's always been in the back of my mind that delayed gratification has been key and instrumental for me to be successful. In addition, as my wife tells me, she firmly feels that there's been something subconscious going on within me, and I tend to agree, and that is that we have three young children, ages 12, 16, and 19, and the two oldest are boys. And I've struggled trying to teach them the concept of delayed gratification. Even though I'm preaching it, they hear it, but I don't really sense that they understand it to the degree that I would like them to. Especially I think our oldest, who's now in college. And in today's world, we expect instant success, immediate rewards. Everything that you see on social media, it just appears as if you wake up one day and you're successful in every manner, materially, financially, work-wise, and truly it doesn't work that way. I mean, maybe that one in a million person that gets lucky, but I think for most of us regular folk, we understand that you really have to delay that gratification. You have to work hard. You have to persevere. And I think this was really a kind of a message that I'll leave as a legacy to my children.
And it's a very hard message to get across to your children because of you're fighting against society that is everything is instantaneous. They have access to instant information, access to just anything they want at their fingertips. So it's sometimes hard to explain that concept. I have the same experience with my children. So I think if more people were to understand that you have to do the work first and not have those expectations, they would probably see different results. And so can you get a little more into, for the listeners who haven't heard the TEDx talk yet, just maybe kind of go through the high points or anything you'd like to discuss regarding your talk?
Well, if I can just piggyback to what you were saying, in terms of trying to teach, at least in my case, trying to teach our children, I think understandably, the disadvantage that they have in terms of learning this concept of delayed gratification is you have to understand, for me, I was a Cuban immigrant. I didn't have material things. My parents both worked extremely hard. My father had two jobs. My mother was, she had her doctorate in education back in Cuba. She had to start all over in the United States, and she didn't know the language. Neither did my father. So for me, it was just ingrained because it is what it is. However, having children at a little bit older age, at a point where I was theoretically, successful in what you might call it in many people's minds, successful, financially, and having, a nice home, having, incredible cars, having uh, trips throughout the world. And my children, our children have traveled the world at a very young age. So understandably, they didn't have an opportunity to really experience that delayed gratification because they're growing up and they're seeing everything to them seeming instantaneous. Whereas to me, I was experiencing it the same as they were, but 40 years older than them, 50 years older than them. So understandably, it's hard to get that message across to young kids when they're growing up seeing things one way, not having experienced the trials and tribulations that I've gone through in my life.
It's the struggle that I think many of us deal with in raising our children, that if you've come from a situation that has formed who you are, so a little bit of struggle, a little bit of delayed gratification, that's then resulted in grit, which then has resulted in your success. And now you've achieved a level of success, and now you're trying to determine how do you get your children to have the benefits of that success without creating those expectations of instantaneous results without the work involved. So it's that balance. And I've had this conversation with many of my friends of, how do we teach we don't want them to go through the same struggles that we did, but how do we teach that message? And what we've done is try to look for ways to be able to have in small doses, like make them work when they don't have to, make them have different responsibilities when they don't have to start to have those experiences. So have you been having the same thing, it sounds like, in terms of your children?
I totally get it. And that's really what my wife and I have been doing. And it was difficult at first, but now fortunately my wife and I are on the same page. Is that, yes, we've kind of pulled back, and it's maybe a little bit unfair to them, especially our older kids. But basically, we've pulled back and we've taken away, and we've said, look, if you want to have certain things, you're going to have to work and find a way to balance work, balance school. Our kids, like for example, we have our 19-year-old who I adore and love deeply. At one point, soon after he turned 16, I got him a car, and shame on me, shame on me. And a year later, I pulled it away. Not because he violated some rule or anything, but I quickly learned that this was a bad message, and he was just feeding into that instant gratification and wanting things more and more. And so now, he's in college and he doesn't have a car, and he gripes about it all the time, but it's just not happening at this point. He's got to buckle down and work hard and get the grades and show commitment and perseverance. He's worked all summer. Our 16-year-old is now learning the same things, because now as parents, we learned with our older, child, the mistakes, at least the mistakes I believe that I made. And so we're kind of changing the rules and making them earn everything that they want, and not just handing it over to them. And it's difficult, as a parent, because, you love your children so much. You want to provide for them. You want to make their life easy and painless. But if you don't have that burning desire, then you're not really going to do the work. If you just are handed things on a gold platter, silver platter, you're just not going to have that fire in your belly. So it's unfortunate that I made the mistakes that I did. And I'm not the perfect parent, but I'm trying to change the error of my ways and try to show them that they've got to take a different approach.
I wouldn't call it an error. I think it's just the struggle of us just trying to be human and try to give our children a better world and a better life. Um, and what I see, I have a question for you in terms of the concept of delayed gratification in the business world. You have a successful practice. I I manage a practice, and I don't like to paint a wide brush, but I do see different traits of not having delayed gratification and generational things. Maybe the younger generation, and I don't want to use the M word, millennials, because every time I say it, people say the millennials are great and everyone's millennial. I love millennials, but there's just different expectations of the information that has been coming to you so fast as a young child, where I see that in attitudes and behaviors with staff, where if an employee has been working with us for 3 months, they ask for a meeting to have a conversation about their career path. And
Yeah.
and my answer is usually, I want you to grow, but you've only been here 3 months. Like, it's why don't we give it a little bit more time? And so, what would be your message in terms of delayed gratification and how in the ophthalmology or business world, the things that you're seeing and ways that we can help do better?
I totally get where you're coming from, because I've had these same conversations over my 35 years, and it really just boils down to understanding the individual understanding that they have to work hard, that nothing's going to be handed over to them. It's not going to be for free. They've got to show their level of commitment, loyalty, perseverance, and execution. I mean, you can work as hard as you want, but ultimately, as whether it be an employee or whomever the person is, if it's a student, you've got to execute and produce the results. And I think one just has to keep fostering that attitude, and I think they get it. It's interesting. I have almost every month I have a number of medical students that rotate with me in the practice. And when I first meet them at the beginning of each rotation, I go through with each one of them. I ask them about their background. I ask them where they grew up, where they went to college, how they decided to go to medical school, when did they realize that they wanted to go into medicine. And then I also pick their brain a little bit, having teenage kids. I kind of pick their brains indirectly. I don't use the term delayed gratification, but I ask them, how did you get through school? Who paid for your schooling? Did you have a car? Did you have meals? Did you have like a little stipend that maybe your parents gave you? And it's interesting, the vast majority of them, not all, some have told me that they were provided a lot by their parents, but the vast majority of them, they really got to where they are as a medical student by showing that grit and determination. Many of them worked through school to get to that point. Many of them just got student loans. Many of them were given little to nothing, like in college. Like, for example, our college teenager, I give him a small amount of money each week just to, have a little fun. Maybe, even though he has room and board paid for, but I remember the college days, the dorm food is kind of, not so good. And so that he can go out and have something outside the dorms. Of course, they never think it's enough, right? They want more and more and more. But no, I mean, for me, it's, not to disclose too much, but basically, it's $75 a week. I mean, if you can't survive on room and board and an additional $75 to blow on going to a game or going to a bar or getting a pizza, then you're not budgeting and you're not making the right choices. So it's interesting that even the medical students, and these students are typically, between 25, 26, 30, some are a little bit older. But it's interesting, they truly do understand, I think, the concept of delayed gratification without coming out and saying those words. And I've been really impressed by the majority of them. The ones that didn't, that were given, they seem to understand. They understand the advantages that they were given. by their parents. But I've really been impressed by the quality of the students from that respect.
Yeah, I recently heard a TEDx speaker. The name is escaping me, but it was the concept of the talk was hiring, and it's hiring that person with the background that looked like they may have had some struggle, as opposed to not always going for the perfect credentials. Not to take away from the credentials, but sometimes when you've achieved credentials without the struggle, your benchmark is different and your standards are different, and your ability to have patience and fire in your belly and the desire to have results after the hard work usually comes from a lot of times comes from that student. So it's really interesting. And another part of that I learned too is I took a professional business communications course as part of my MBA coursework, which TEDx was a big part of that. And the big concept of delivering a powerful message was around storytelling. And so did you, in your TEDx talk, how did you utilize storytelling to deliver an impactful message? And do you agree and use that concept of storytelling in your everyday work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so when they teach us the process of writing a talk, here's basically the way they teach it in this thought leader organization. So basically, you start off with kind of a one sentence, what they call a hook, just to get the audience's attention. Then you basically tell an up story. And my up story, which is really amazing, is having gone to the University of Michigan. I'm a huge Michigan fan, especially Michigan college football. So I wear Michigan attire all the time when I'm outside the office. Uh, so, and when I'm traveling the world with my family, I do as well. And so I tell this up story where about 5, 6 years ago, my family and I were checking out of a hotel in Barcelona, Spain, and I'm wearing my Michigan threads. And the woman in line behind me asks if I'm from Michigan. I didn't grow up in Michigan. I said, no, I grew up in Indiana, but I went to college and medical school at Michigan. And then this woman proceeds to tell me that, hey, what part of Indiana? Because her husband grew up in Indiana. And of course, I just say, well, it's a tiny little town, Crown Point. You've never heard of it. And she goes, Crown Point? My husband grew up in Crown Point. So she shouts for her husband, who comes walking up briskly. And guess what? We're in Barcelona, Spain, checking out of a hotel. This was one of my best friends in 7th grade. I hadn't
Wow.
seen him in 40 years.
Wow.
And so, and then we're all departing, we're all checking out, and we're going on the same cruise ship, all of us. So it's just uncanny how the world can really be so small. But basically, that was my up story. Then it transitions to a down story, and a down story is how your journey has been difficult or something that's happened to you. So then I transition to really what we've been talking about here, how growing up I was a refugee, I didn't have a lot of things, my struggles. So you talk about that. Then from the down story, you transition to the journey, the journey meaning the discussion, the things you want to bring up in your talk as it relates, in my case, to delayed gratification. Then you go to a main point, which is just a brief summary of your journey. And then you go to a call to action, which is what are the steps the audience can take to learn whatever you're talking about. In my case, delayed gratification. So I went through the 3 steps of learning delayed gratification. And then there's the close, which is just a 1 or 2 sentence close. So those are basically the steps that are taught in terms of delivering so-called, according to thought leader organization, to delivering the ideal TEDx talk. But truly, when you watch TEDx videos online, I mean, many of them don't follow that process, but it's really a great process, and I really enjoyed putting that together.
And you're right, they don't follow all the same process, but one of the things I've seen continue to come up is the ability to be impactful in some way using a story, whether it be a story about struggle, a story about success, a story about failure. And
Right.
it just seems to grab the user, which I think can be applied in the world of business, as you try to make your messages more impactful to the people that you lead, to try to be authentic, vulnerable, and use storytelling to get them to really hear you and understand you.
Correct. I agree wholeheartedly.
So what do you see yourself doing in the next 5 years now that you've given your TEDx talk and you sound like you got the bug? What do you see yourself doing?
Yeah, well, interesting question. So in the ideal world, here's what I have envisioned. I love ophthalmology, and I certainly don't want to give that up. But probably in the next 2 or 3 years, I might consider maybe tapering down my schedule a little bit rather than working 5 full-time days, maybe cutting it back a little bit to allow for some other things. And those other things include not only hopefully giving 1 or 2 more TEDx talks, but in addition, I just love public speaking. So I'd love to get out there and hopefully have my message heard by others, and kind of becoming a professional paid speaker, if you want to call it that. In addition, I'm just in the process of actually after our podcast today, I'm meeting with a publisher that I'd like to start writing a book on my journey. And so my goal is that I'd like to fast track that and get that book written between now and maybe the end of this year. So in the next 3 to 4 months, have it written, then have it published. So I mean, I just want to be out there. I want to kind of give back and tell the world my story and leave it as a legacy for others.
Inspirational. And I'm going to go back to saying that kind of drive, that so you're continuing with all your success, you're looking to do more, that you can't get that many places other than an experience. It's just who you are. You lived it, and you had to push to fight to where you needed to go and where you wanted to be. And so I think when I leave here, I'm going to go and take my daughter's car keys away from her and try to get her to tell her to struggle. You got to figure it out.
Oh, goodness.
Go get on the bus. So one thing I'd like to do is leave the podcast listeners with a resource. Are there any resources that you can give the audience in terms of the topics today, or delayed gratification or anything related?
Yes, well, hopefully by the time this podcast comes out, I am just designing a simplified website. I mean, our practice website, which your listeners are welcome to go to, is ArizonaEyeInstitute.com. But that's really all professional and practice related, so they can look at the things that we do, et cetera, et cetera. But I do have my personal website, which is Dr. Emilio.Justo.com. It's not live yet because I'm still working on putting some final touches. It'll be a more simplified website, but in there we'll have the TEDx video, and then as I get to the book, we'll have that in there. Any other events or speaking engagements, and ways for people to reach me. For example, if they do want to reach out to me to have me speak in front of their organization, whether it be youth organizations or young adults or even parents, because I think that the message is a very good message for parents as well. I wish I had really thought about this message as our kids were younger, and it kind of took them growing up and learning by the school of hard knocks my mistakes, that now I'm kind of trying to turn the bus around a little bit.
Well, Dr. Justo, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. It truly has been a pleasure talking to you about your TEDx journey and delayed gratification, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Guido. Really appreciate your time, and it was a pleasure to meet you and get to know you. Thank you.
I also want to take a moment to thank our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot do what we do without you. If you like our podcast, kindly share it with your friends on social media. Also, please don't forget to provide a review on iTunes or Google Play. Your reviews will help other doctors and practice owners find us. Till we meet again, wishing all of you an amazing week ahead.